Hello and welcome to First Chapter Fridays, 4th edition. I'm Brielle from the Wyckoff Public Library, and this evening I'll be reading Chapter 1 from Caroline, Little House Revisited by Sarah Miller. As a young girl, I very much enjoyed reading the entire Little House on the Prairie book series, as well as watching the television show. A little over a year ago, I found myself at the bookstore and I came across this new book, Caroline, and knew that I had to treat myself to it. Being that there are so many books, so little time though, I've only just begun to read it. This book is a work of historical fiction, and it's the same captivating story that we remember from the Little House series, but this time it's told from a new perspective, that of the mother Caroline. I hope you enjoy. None knew thee but to love thee, thou dear one of my heart. Oh, thy memory is ever fresh and green, Daisy Dean. Chapter 1. Caroline's wrist turned and flicked as the steel tongue of her crochet hook dipped in and out, mirroring the movement of the fiddle's bow. With each note, the white thread licked a warm line across her finger. Her pattern had just begun to repeat, chorus-like, as the tune ended. She smoothed the frilled cluster of scallops against her cuff and smiled. So long as she could keep ahead of the mending, a pair of lace wrists would freshen her second-best blue wool before snowmelt. There would be no time for a collar. Once the trees began to bud, she must turn her hands to the tedious seams of a new set of diapers, bonnets, and gowns. Charles rested the fiddle on his knees and primed himself with a breath. "What is it, Charles?" Caroline asked, plucking a slouching festoon of thread into place. "I've had an offer for this place," he said. Caroline's hook stilled. An offer? Gustafson's agreed to pay $1,012.50 for our half of this quarter section. The sum swept her mind clean as a gust of wind. "My goodness," she said. $1,012. And the delightful absurdity of 50 cents besides, like a sprinkling of sugar. They could use it to buy a week's worth of satin hair ribbons for Mary and Laura. "Oh, Charles," Caroline clasped her hands before her lips to hide their eager trembling. "And the same for Henry and Polly's half?" Charles grimaced. "Gustafson can only afford 80 acres. Your brother isn't going." Going. The image her mind had already begun to embroider unraveled. Such foolish greed. She had let herself imagine that money as though it were sitting in her lap beneath this very roof, not as the lever that would pry her loose of it. She need not ask where they would go. All winter long, Charles had talked of Kansas, its free, level land and bountiful game. Even Mary and little Laura could repeat his reveries of the mighty jackrabbits and treeless acreage as easily as the words of the Gypsy King. The West was a song Charles wanted a hand in composing. A subtle tightening, as though she were taking hold of the cabin and everything in it, passed over her. To move westward was nothing new, but always she had traveled from the sanctuary of one family to another. From Ma and Papa Frederick's house in Concord to Father and Mother Ingalls' farm, and from there to this quarter section they had bought together with Henry and Polly, just 7 miles east of the Mississippi. And yet beneath that apprehension, a twinkle of excitement. Caroline remembered the thrill, after 3 years of married life spent under others' roofs, of buying this place and making of it a home all their own. Within 6 months, she had been pregnant. How might it feel to do the same on land that bore no mark of another family? Such a place would belong more thoroughly to them than anything had before. "We stake our claim, make improvements on the land while Gustafson makes his payments, and by the time the Indians move on, we can clear the mortgage on this place and preempt a full 160 acres with upward of $500 left to spare," Charles went on, pulling a blue handbill from his pocket. "The settlers put up such a fuss that the governments finally reneged on the railroad interests. The Indian Territory is there for the taking, $1.25 an acre. We only have to be there when the land opens up. The sooner we arrive, the sooner we've put in our 14 months residency." He leaned forward for her reply. The arithmetic alone spoke for itself. Twice the acreage, none of the debt. Cash in hand, where before they had banked with pelts and crops. She should not hesitate at such a gain. Yet how to weigh that against losses that could not be measured? Departing before the Mississippi thawed would not leave time enough to bid her own mother goodbye. She did not answer yes or no. "We will have an increase in the family well before then," she said instead. Caroline tucked her lips together. She had not intended to tell him for another month yet, not until she was certain the child was safely rooted. But Charles looked at her as though it were the first time, and she went rosy in the glow of happiness. "When?" he asked. "Before harvest." He combed his fingers through his whiskers. "Should we wait?" Her conscience rippled. She could say yes, and he would give her the year at least, restaking himself to this land without question or complaint. Another year with her sisters and brother, with Mother and Father Ingalls, with plenty of time to visit Ma and Papa Frederick one more time. One final time. Were she to answer on behalf of the coming child, it might even be an unselfish thing to ask. Yet she'd had no sense of its presence, only the absence of her monthly courses coupled with an unaccountable warmth in her hands and feet. Nothing to signal it as separate from herself. Caroline's eyes roved over the place where her china shepherdess stood gazing down from the mantel. The silken glaze of her painted dress and body seemed at once so hard and smooth as to render the little woman untouchable. If she indulged herself by claiming this time, Caroline thought, Charles would treat her with almost unbearable awe and deference. No matter that carrying a child made her feel no more fragile than a churn full of cream. Staying would only make for a year shadowed with lasts. One vast goodbye, shattered over innumerable small moments. Better to travel now, she decided. It will only be harder if we wait. He leaned back, grinning, until the chair was on tiptoe. Her news had dyed the fabric of the coming year twice as brightly for Charles. He took up the fiddle and played softly so as not to wake the girls. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar, for the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there. Caroline laid her morsel of lace aside and rocked herself deeply into the long notes. I hope you enjoyed the first chapter of Caroline, Little House Revisited. This book is available on Hoopla if you'd like to continue to read it or to listen to the audio version available at home. You can use your Wyckoff Library card to log into Hoopla, and if you need any assistance, you can go to the Wyckoff Library website, wyckofflibrary.org, and go to Digital Resources for further instructions on how to use Hoopla. I hope you enjoyed this edition of First Chapter Fridays. Thank you, and have a good night.